What's up, everybody? This is maximum value of a string in an array. This is my solution to a common software developer and software engineering interview question. So for any of you out there who are looking to go into software development, this video is for you. So let's get right into it. You're given a vector of strings. And in this vector of strings, your job is to return the maximum value of any string in these strings. And it's a little tricky because you have a combination of both characters and numbers. If you have a string that's purely characters, you want to return the number of characters in that string. And if you have a string that's just numbers, you want to return the value of that number. There's not a very simple way to determine whether or not a string is made up of numbers or just letters or a combination of both. So you have to check each string individually and go through each character that makes up the string. So I wanted to go through my exact process of how I solve this problem, and hopefully by watching this you can get a better idea of how you could solve this problem yourself and a better idea of what it's like to solve a problem like this in general. So usually what you got to do, and what I do, is just try the first thing that pops into your head. And so in this section, what I'm doing is I was trying to test the isDigit method, which I didn't realize just returns a Boolean of true or false. And I thought it would be able to check if a string was an integer or not. And so but then I realized I could try the STOI method, which converts a string to an integer, and that's how I could check if my string was made up of integers or characters. There are a few times where I had to just ditch what I thought was going to work, and I had to do some practices. So you see I do that in a little bit. I'm going to comment out the whole block of code that I was working on, and I had to figure out how to use the actual method first before I could try to implement it. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to see if I use the STOI method on this input that has leading zeros, if it'll break or if it'll actually return a 1 like I'm expecting. There are a few times where I just sit there and I don't know what to do. That just happened. Then I realized, hey, I should probably get a plan going, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm adding some comments. So here's something I really want to emphasize. You gotta use Google. If you're stuck on something, or if you need to research something, search it. So you see I'm doing a little bit of research here to figure out if the conversion method I'm using will work, or if there's anything better I could be doing to figure out this conversion from string to integer. This is when I realized I needed to ditch my last attempt of using the STOI method, and I found another method that I could use called isAlpha. I'm using the isAlpha method, which checks a value to see if it's a letter in the alphabet. And the reason I'm doing that is because if the string has any letters in it, then that means I'm going to be adding up the number of characters in the string and return that as the value. And otherwise, I know that string will be made up of just numbers, so I can convert that string of numbers to an integer and use that. And to reiterate, the maximum value of the characters or the integers is the solution to the problem. So one thing I mistakenly thought is that is alpha would return true or false, whether or not the character I was checking was a letter of the alphabet. But what I'm going to learn right now is that it will return a value greater than 0 if it is a letter of the alphabet and 0 if it is not. So at this point, I thought I was getting a out of range error and it was just outputting something different. But if you'll notice, I'm using the wrong increment in my second for loop. I'm incrementing by I instead of by J. And I learned that eventually. Here I'm outputting whether or not a character is a letter or a number. But what kept happening is that it would just say not a letter for everything, even when it was a letter. But I realized I had just completely written the is alpha statement wrong, so I corrected that and it worked, luckily. I've gotten wrong answers so many times by this point, it's not even funny. But you gotta learn to deal with that. This is finally when I got it to work. The isAlpha function finally got it to check whether or not what I was reading was a letter or a number. And that was the first step to figuring out this problem. This is the part where I lose a little bit of focus and I have to take a break, so I went on Instagram. So it took me quite a while to figure out what I wanted to do with the string if I determined whether or not it had letters in it. Eventually what I decided to do was to create a Boolean that would check whether or not it had numbers in it, and I would add the sum of the characters, or the number of characters in that string if it had letters in it, to a vector. And then if it didn't have any characters in it, or if it was just a number, I would convert it to an integer and I would push that onto the same vector, and I would loop through that vector later on and find the max value in that vector and return that, which is that solution to the problem. I'm like one step away at this point. All I have to do is create a max variable and return that from the function. So you see that last for loop is where I loop through my vector of sums, and I'm going to find the max value in that vector of sums, which I created from adding up the number of characters if it was a string of characters, or converting the string to an integer if it was a string of just integers. And this is where I finally get it to work. After I correct this last error, this is where I get accepted. And that is such a good feeling, I'll tell you. It was so great. I spent about an hour and a half on this project. Took me probably a little bit longer than most people, but I'm still learning. So thanks so much for watching.